Our next speaker, Josh Bersin, is a world-renowned research analyst, public speaker, and writer on all of the topics that we're here to explore this weekend: HR, talent, recruiting, technology, and the intersection between life and work. He's an advisor for a wide variety of HR and learning companies, helping to align their products and services towards the needs of the future. His professional goal is to make work better for those inside of companies by helping HR teams and professionals stay informed, stay up to date, and keep pace. Josh is joining Responsive Conference to share some research that he's not shared before, some trends to watch in the future. So can we get a standing ovation for Josh Bersin?
Thank you. You guys are kind of an intimidating group for me because I don't really know this is sort of a hybrid conference of touchy-feely stuff and business stuff and tech stuff and HR stuff. So I'm thrilled to be here, and I'm only here for another hour or two, but any of you that want to talk independently, offline, I'd love to hear about what's going on in your companies. What I put together is a presentation on where the world, I think, is going next year. And so it's going to be about 10 or 15 minutes about business stuff, and then about 10 or 15 minutes about HR stuff and people stuff. Many of you may know that I'm not an HR person. I've never done HR. I was actually in the business roles for 20 years before I became an analyst. I tripped onto this profession by accident when I was laid off in 2000 and became a research analyst and have come to love the profession that you're all a part of. So I'm always sort of taking a perspective on why are we doing the things we're doing in HR, what is the purpose and what is the reason that we're doing what we're doing. So I'm going to try to give you a little bit of that today and think about where things are going over the next year. The first thing is work in general. It's been interesting. I was listening to the fertility and the parenting discussion earlier. I'm in my early 60s. So my wife went through all this and she decided to stop working in her 40s. And, I'm still working and dealing with all the same issues you guys are. Work is completely different now than it was when I got out of college. Completely different. For those of you that are my age, you understand what I'm talking about. We literally went home. When I went to work, we literally went home with briefcases and had no voicemail, no email, no nothing. There was nothing at home. There was no work unless you brought paper with you. Now, obviously, we're working all the time. The technology is accelerating. Our jobs are getting automated. Our employees' jobs are getting automated. Our companies are getting automated. Digital transformation's been going on for 5 years. Now we're kind of past that. Now we're into the organizational transformation to recover from the digital transformation that everybody's been through. And that's where I think HR is we're catching up on the people practices that have been much more slow and difficult to create than the digital business models that we created. And I was really interested in John's conversation this morning about Zappos because I've actually interviewed many, many companies on this networked business model and how it works. And I'll talk about that in a minute. The biggest thing that's happened on the economy side and the business side is that because of all this technology, and I'm sure Zappos would echo this too, most of the companies you work in have instant real-time access to your customers, which means you're all in the service business. You're watching data, you're talking to people, you're responding to people, you have internal clients. This is what's going on inside of HR too, is we're all in service roles. And when you look at the data on skills of the future, which I just wrote something about last weekend, technical skills are not actually the skills that people are looking for. They're looking for emotional skills, empathy skills, relationship skills, communication skills, all because we're becoming a service economy. And that's why CEOs are so worried about what you guys do, because they now realize that if we can't take care of the people, we can't even run our companies. And I think this business roundtable thing, which I'll talk about later, that came out a couple of weeks ago, is a sort of slow reaction of CEOs to realizing, maybe the people who work for us actually are more important than we thought they were. One of the things, I have a lot of friends that have been involved in analytics of HR for a long time, and they've always been pushing this idea of how we financially measure people. And one of the things that I've tried to communicate to them is we really shouldn't be measuring people as an expense. People really are an investment. People are the only appreciating asset you have in the company, that when you invest more in them, they become more productive and more engaged and more effective and better for customers. So CEOs are beginning to realize that, and that's a little bit of what's going on right now. But on the other side, we are also suffering from this very strange time, and economists are very puzzled about this, and lots of articles are getting written all the time about it, that we're actually getting less work done per hour than we are growing our companies. The GDP has grown at 2.5 to 3 to 3.5% for the last decade, or almost 11 years. Productivity has grown at 1%. So there's this gap growing between the amount of business outcome that your company is creating and the amount of work per hour that we're getting done as human beings. And the burden of that gap is falling on the shoulders of people. People are working more hours. People are taking work home. We were talking earlier, I was listening to the conversations earlier about what it's like to be a parent. All of that, I mean, the guy, I forget his name, who had to go to Sao Paulo and get on the phone and listen to his kids. I mean, that whole thing was just heartbreaking. This is what work has become. And so HR has to be involved in this because people don't have a lot of time for anything else. It's sort of like my wife always uses this expression, you can't put hot water in a full teapot. Once it's full, you have to take something away before you do something else. And so a lot of what we're now dealing with in HR is not just how do we make people feel better and be more engaged, but how do we take things off their plate so that they can do the things that are more important, so they don't have FOMO all day, worried about where they're supposed to be spending their times. And so managers can focus on reductionism and focus and purpose. And I think that's going to happen because I'm pretty sure we're going to have an economic slowdown next year. And for those of you who've been around as long as I have, the world changes very fast when the company's not growing at 15 or 20% a year. And this all of a sudden becomes a very, very big priority. In fact, right now, it's interesting. If you look at the data on economic growth, there are basically two things that cause an economy to grow: the number of people working and the productivity per person. The number of people working is actually not growing. The fertility rate in the US, UK, Germany, Japan, most developed economies is below replacement. We are actually shrinking the size of the workforce. The other parts of the world are growing, and so that's why there's all this immigration. And so what the economists have now concluded that even if the economy grows at 2 or 3%, and they're projecting it's going to grow slower, the only way it will grow is through quality of labor. Quality of labor means skills, engagement, and productivity. And so one of the things I've been trying to talk about with HR people for really a couple of years is you're really the productivity department. If people aren't getting work done, the business guys are going to get blamed for it, but a lot of the reason they're not getting work done comes down to the practices in the workplace and the management tools that we put in front of people. So this is really a mandate for us. And CEOs are going to get very focused on this. This is some data from just a few months ago from PwC. And now that there's a lot of articles coming out about the slowdown in the economy, which is absolutely, overdue, the CEOs are beginning to say, we have this skills issue. Yes, 41% of us need to reskill our workforce because of AI. But we're also a little worried about whether we're measuring people effectively, whether we're getting enough work out of the people that we have, and whether we're going to be financially effective in delivering the results that we want. And so more and more of the conversations we're going to be having, I think, with our business counterparts are going to be about execution. And I drew this little picture in the corner because I think it's interesting to just think about the fact that, skills and innovation, engagement are all part of execution. And so the conversation that we've been having about being responsive and being agile and having a great culture and having great engagement is probably going to have a slightly different look to it next year when people are worried about growth. On the employee side, there's an amazing amount of anxiety in the workforce. And I experienced this in my own conversations with a lot of HR people. My children are in their late 20s, so I get to talk to them about it all the time. People are worried about their jobs, they're worried about their skills, they're worried about their income, they're worried about their standard of living, they're worried about if they live in the Bay Area, they're worried about whether they're ever going to be able to buy a house. They're worried about taking work home, they're worried about their families. This is the world we live in. And so while that's all going on, the sense of trust in the rest of the economy is declining. And so we are becoming responsible for the well-being of our people. And for many of you, that's probably part of your life, and that's the reason you're in HR. It didn't used to be this way, believe me. This is only the last 5 or 10 years that this has become true. And whether you like it or not, it's just sort of the responsibility that we've been given. This is a little bit hard chart to read, but let me just explain it to you. This is some research the Conference Board just put out 2 weeks ago, and the vertical chart is, the vertical side is percentage of employees satisfied, and the horizontal is the impact of this on people's lives. And so the bottom right corner are the things that are keeping people up at night. It's kind of a bad chart because it should be in a different quadrant, but anyway. And what you see when you look at this data is that what employees are the most worried about is not really their fertility benefits. They're worried about their careers. Because I do believe that most people come to work. And they come to work hoping that they can express their aspirations for their lives and their careers and their jobs at work. And if they have a job they love, they're pretty happy. And if they're getting work done every day and they like the team they're with, they're pretty happy. And they want to get rewarded for that. They want to see recognition, they want to see pay, they want to see career progression. And so that comes up to be number one. And then, of course, there's these other issues of how am I evaluated? Is the workplace fair? Is the workplace inclusive? Is the workplace safe? All of those things are related. So the second thing I want to talk about is management. For me, being a little bit older than many of you, I've lived through different philosophies of management. And as an analyst, I get to read a lot. I don't see a timer, so somebody's going to have to tell me when I'm short on time, you guys, because I do tend to go a little bit long on this stuff. We've gone through, if you go back and you read the old books, you read the GE Way or, Peter Drucker or some of the older books on management, they're kind of in the left. They're really about running companies as hierarchies. And I worked in companies like that, and it was great. They didn't get disrupted. You had great careers in those companies. The companies took care of you. I mean, the amount of training I got my 10 years at IBM is unbelievable. I learned so much there because it was a stable company that was growing, and it was a well-managed hierarchy. Of course, that all got upset. I think the company that really pioneered this idea of employees being in charge, not the leaders being in charge, was probably Google in the early days of the 20% time, which was a very, very innovative concept and obviously worked really, really well. Now it's sort of working against Google in a sense. The employees are kind of, on their, kind of a little bit taken over. But that was a philosophical change. It happened in the 1980s and the 1990s. Now we're in this world of trying to figure out how to manage a company that is a network. And I think the Zappos holacracy work has been really, really pioneering and important for people to think about this. I did and this has changed the way management practices work. If you look at performance management, stuff that's been written about performance management, every 5 or 6 years, it comes up with it sort of reinvents itself around these philosophies. I think the idea of operating your company as a network is much, much more complicated than you realize. It changes careers, it changes pay, it changes job titles, it changes job levels, it changes job descriptions. Do we even need job descriptions? It's really very profound. I was, earlier this week, I was in New York and I met with ADP. How many of you do business with ADP? Most people think ADP is this kind of funky old payroll company. Actually, ADP is one of the most innovative companies in the tech market. And they're going to launch something that's going to blow your mind. It's something they've been working on for about 5 years. And it's a network graph-based HCM system that's designed for companies that operate as teams. And I've talked to Workday about this, and I've talked to Oracle, and I've talked to SAP and the other vendors about it. They don't see this coming. we don't have the right tools or the right management practices to really operate our companies as teams yet. And that's going to be a big part of your job in HR, is figuring out how to build a set of common practices, common cultures, and tools to allow people to operate in teams. By the way, this is not a new concept. There's a very, very interesting book written by the Japanese. It's 20 years old, called Amoeba Management. By the way, the Japanese companies have some of the most sophisticated management thinkers of all. I remember I met the CHRO of Hitachi many years ago, and he told me, we have 100 CEOs in the company. We have 100 heads of HR, we have 100 P&Ls, we have 100 businesses, and it works great for us. We're growing like crazy. Our expenses are a little bit out of control because there's a lot of duplication, but we're basically operating the company as a network. So we're not the first ones who thought about this, but now that it's really taken off, the research shows, when I first studied this at Deloitte in 2016, about 4% of the companies self-identified as operating as a network. Today it's 35%. So all of you are going to have to think about this. And the area where it's affecting companies the most is, what do we do with leaders? What you find in most organizations, it's certainly true in my experience, both in the companies I worked for and the company that I ran, is that leaders have expectations for their level of reward and their level of power and their level of authority, and what they're supposed to do and how they're going to get paid and whether they get the corner parking place and the bigger office and all those things. And now what we're finding is, you know what? We don't really need that stuff. That isn't what we need to be successful. We need leaders that can operate in a network. We need leaders that can empower people. We need leaders that can implement a growth mindset. You should read Satya Nadella's book about this at Microsoft. It's a totally different way of thinking about what leaders do. And if you look at the Zappos model or the Teams model, leaders sometimes don't even have management roles. They're running projects, they're running teams, they're running initiatives, but they may not be, line leaders. So we've got a lot of interesting work to do to give leaders the coaching to figure out how to assess leaders, to put the right people into these roles, and to deal with the fact that many of the leaders in companies are going to be much younger, much less experienced, and many of us, my age, are going to work for people that are much younger than we are, and that's just the way it's going to be. I spent about 7 years at Deloitte, interesting time there. And the entire time I was there, I worked for people that were at least 15 to 20 years younger than me, who had way less business experience than I had. But it was a good learning experience for me to see what they were dealing with and how they were adapting to all these changes. So this is a big topic we've got to deal with. Also, how do we manage careers? What does a career look like in a network? You're not going to get promoted every 2 years. Maybe you shouldn't be promoted every 2 years. Maybe you get a raise. But you should work on projects that are progressing you in the direction you want to go. I wrote a really pretty well-read article a couple of months ago on what are called talent marketplaces. One of the things you need to think about a little bit is, if your company is operating as a network, you can't have a hierarchical career model anymore. It's just not going to work. You need to have more of a marketplace model for careers where people work on multiple things at a time and they're rewarded for their value or their expertise on those teams. I was noticing John mentioned something this morning. It just blew by you guys. You probably didn't hear it. But I think he said that the teams at Zappos can decide how to pay people. I think he said that. And that's kind of a bizarre thought. This team's going to pay somebody a whole bunch of money, and this team's going to pay somebody with the same skills a whole bunch less money. So this is all part of, sort of adapting to this new world. Now, the third topic I want to talk about a little bit is, I'm going to go a little over, but I'll try to speed up, is employee experience. I was talking to a couple of vendors outside. This is the buzzword of the century. And the unfortunate part about these buzzwords is everybody jumps into this, and then it doesn't mean anything. So now all of the programs and diversity, inclusion, benefits, rewards, development, career, they're all employee experience programs. And the good thing about that is it has really forced us to rethink how we solve problems. If we're not solving the problems in the employee's eyes, we're not solving the problem. It's not something we design in a conference room and roll out. It's something the employees have to like. And if they don't like it, we didn't do it right. So that's a totally different mindset. It also means we're throwing a lot of things against the wall. I think it's interesting how many benefits and perks and rewards and initiatives and programs companies are creating. And you know what I find out when I talk to most companies is there are people that love all of them. I really think what you ought to think about a little bit as you sort of go through the rationalization of these things is at some point you're not going to be able to afford all of those programs. And what is it that's really matters? And I think what you'll find, at least my research has pointed out, is at the end of it all, it really comes down to the job, the management, the environment being safe, ability to grow, trust, and financial and physical well-being. And those are really the things that matter. And some of those perks and benefits are going to have to just come and go. And I did a study last year with LinkedIn that was really interesting. We had 2,800 people answer the question, what is the number one thing that would make you happier at work? And they said it was the job. If my job was a little bit better, if I could get it done a little bit easier, if I could focus on the things that I want to do and work in the kind of work that I want to do as a human being, that I want to do in my career, I would be happier. And so that's a reminder that thinking about the job and how work gets done is still probably the most important thing that we can do in HR. Engagement, I'll just kind of touch on this. We're basically in a world where most of you are going to have very highly instrumented companies. You've got a lot of data, and the tools that are coming out now, I just talked to one of the vendors outside actually, who has a tool in Slack that can coach you on D&I, are becoming smarter and smarter and smarter so that you will not only be able to come up with great ideas, but you'll have great data about what's going on in the organization. And I think one of the disciplines that I hear about in all of the HR departments I talk to is we need to be better at understanding data. We need to be better at aggregating data, diagnosing data, telling stories about data, explaining to people what this data means, and using it as an integrated way. And I think, one of the maybe most interesting things that's going to happen in the next year is we're going to have really an architecture and a whole system for employee listening that's going to make it easier for you and also for business leaders to make the right decisions. And by the way, one of the problems in the engagement industry in the past is the data came to HR. And what are we going to do with it? We need to give it to the leaders and they need to act on it. So now we're getting to the point where these systems are really designed to give the data directly to line leaders. Skip that. The final thing I want to touch on, because I'm a little short on time, is this idea of trust. Oh, I got another 5 minutes. You just gave me another little chunk. So we've got organization design, we've got the economy, we've got teams, we've got management, we've got leadership, we've got engagement, we've got culture, we've got employee experience. The thing that probably sits on top of all of this is this new role of business in trust. I don't need to tell you guys this because most of you are in tech companies, but this is the most interesting data of all. And this is from the Edelman Trust Barometer, which is a fascinating thing. I think everybody in HR should read it. And it's thousands, it's actually millions of people who take this survey all over the world, and you can look at it by country. And basically what it shows is we're now living in a time where the average employee doesn't really trust the political institutions around them. They may or may not trust their community institutions in the towns in which they live, but they do trust you. They do trust their employer. In fact, their employers are now the most trusted agents in most people's lives. And, the result of that is this, business roundtable thing, which, by the way, I thought it was kind of a joke that they had to come out and make this big manifesto about something that's been written about for 30 years. That businesses are here to take care of society, not just employees or not just shareholders. But anyway, we're doing it anyway. So we have this big theme at the CEO level that we're here to take care of society, to take care of employees, to take care of stakeholders. Oh yeah, the shareholders will take care of them too. And immediately following that, of course, is a lot of skepticism about, yeah, you guys have said that, but let's see you actually live that way. Let's see you actually pay people. Let's see you raise wages. I mean, what are you doing with all the profits? Are you raising the wages? Are you actually giving people more time at work? Are you reducing the expectations on people to make their lives better? And I think we are right caught in the middle of that. And I think the role that HR has in 2020 is to be, in a sense, the ombudsman or the culture translators between whether the business is acting that way or not. It's not a black and white topic. It's very, very difficult. If you look at companies like Patagonia or Whole Foods, in their early days, I assume it's the same now that they're part of Amazon, their entire essence when they were founding was not just to build a company to sell shoes, but actually to solve a problem. And those companies, Unilever, they are getting back to their roots. They are going back to their founding principles of where did J&J start? Not, now they're involved in all the opioid stuff, but they're going back to the roots. And I think all of you can help your senior leaders go through that journey and talk about those things, and it'll make it easier for them to deal with all these issues of trust that keep coming up at work. I think HR departments are also going to be transformed. One of the reasons that I started this academy is that everywhere I would go and talk to HR people, we would talk about these issues, and they would say, well, wow, we're not ready for that. Our HR teams are not ready. We don't have the right people in the right roles. And I think some of this is you and us in the profession reskilling ourselves and getting ourselves ready for this new world of technology where everything we do is really about productivity and about making work better, not about HR. HR is really a means to an end. And I'll leave you with one more thought, before I wrap up. I think maybe the most fundamental sort of design change that's taking place in HR that may not seem as existential to you as it does to me, because I talk to a lot of very old companies, that haven't been doing this yet, is co-designing solutions directly in an iterative way with your business counterparts. Now, for a lot of you, that's probably common, and you've probably been doing that because I know a lot of you are in tech companies, but this is a whole different way of thinking about what HR does. And that changes the operating model, that changes the way you deliver solutions, it changes the way you capture data, and the way you iteratively solve problems in your company. The final thing, I just thought I'd wrap up with something kind of like about HR in general. I think in 2020, we are all going to have some interesting challenges. We're going to have to worry about the economy a little bit. We're probably going to get some pressure on margins and growth and budgets. We're going to have to rethink most of the HR practices we have. If you really think about your company as a network, the way you do performance and succession and pay and rewards and careers are all going to get affected by that. We're going to have to get very, very good at understanding and managing data. We're going to have to stay focused on the employee, and we're going to have to be bold. And the one thing I would say I've learned in my 20 years as an analyst is one of the most important things for us to do in HR is to be confident enough to push back on business leaders when they need to hear what it is they need to hear. And that's not the HR department that is here to deliver service. That's the HR department that actually is a consultant to the business. And I think in 2020, that will be one of the most important things that we do. So thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity to come talk to you guys. I'm sorry I went a little bit over, but the wonderful conference, and I look forward to talking to all of you one-on-one. Thank you.